Our elbows up Commander-in-Chief Mark Carney is set to go to the Lion's Den in Washington to bring a trade deal home that Canada desperately needs. But don't hold your breath, because what I'm about to show you is that Mark Carney is not the guy for the job. Let's take a look.
That relationship will be front and center this week as the Prime Minister heads to Washington. CTV's Colton Prale on why some political experts are calling this a trip into the lion's den that Mark Carney has to make.
As Mark Carney prepares for a sit-down with Donald Trump in Washington, he does so under the weight of his own expectations.
He does need to show some progress. The fact that there hasn't been any progress after missing deadline after deadline does make Canadians sort of wonder.
Carney campaigned on his strength as a negotiator, and some in Washington say he'll need to use those skills if he hopes to find any tariff relief, with the U.S. president likely to look for more concessions from Canada on trade and national security issues.
I think those are some of the toughest issues that we would have expected to see play out in a USMCA or CUSMA review process, but actually are likely to get ironed out much in advance of that.
Sources in the federal government tell CTV News they're cautiously optimistic Canada could see some relief on steel and aluminum tariffs, and are willing to brave the president's volatility to achieve it.
From his point of view, it's better to take the risk of political failure and go to Washington and meet with President Trump rather than sit in Ottawa and hope that something comes to him.
It comes as Pierre Poilievre has held back on attacking Carney's handling of Trump, instead focusing on domestic issues like crime and affordability. Friday, Poilievre posting on social media that he hopes Mark Carney will keep his promise and negotiate a win.
This is for the Prime Minister to deliver or fail. And it becomes, in political terms, a very heavy anchor, political anchor for the Prime Minister if he fails. It will drag him down.
Industry and political experts that CTV News has spoken to are skeptical that a trade deal will be reached on Tuesday, with one former White House official saying they expect talks to focus on security issues, like the wars in Ukraine and Gaza. Heather.
CTV's Colton Prale in Ottawa. There has been a great deal of unpredictability in these negotiations from the start. So how does one approach this type of situation?
Approaching this type of situation is by first and foremost building a productive and competitive Canadian economy. But how do you do this? You do this by getting the government out of the way of Canadian entrepreneurs and allowing Canadian entrepreneurs and creative minds to come up with private solutions to the problems we face day to day. In a previous video, I did a dive about how Canadian entrepreneurs are about to solve the Canada Post situation should the government allow them to do it. But now with Carney going into Washington to try to secure a trade deal, hope is kind of on the horizon. But with this next segment, you're going to see why Carney's elbows should be as low as possible. Let's take a look.
If I look back over the past 3 months, let's say in the lead up to that August the 1st deadline and since, there has been no effort on the part of the federal government to set that context publicly facing. There has been, and I understand the impetus around not negotiating in public, not disclosing all the details of what's been happening behind the scenes. But even this week, the reason we found out that Prime Minister Carney and President Trump had spoken is because a reporter shouted a question on the way into, I think it was caucus, and the Prime Minister said, yes, we've spoken. And then when, how, why, none of those questions were answered. There was some testimony from Dominic LeBlanc, Minister LeBlanc, this week before a committee that again indicated a deal wasn't dead. But other than that, we know nothing about what's happened over the past few months.
Yeah, it could either be what Scott just outlined, which is just a great confidence in the Prime Minister to solve this as the CEO of Canada, and they have overwhelming and maybe naive confidence in his ability to settle this deal, or they're just hunkering down. And the PMO is just hunkering down and can't actually, or doesn't want to put out what the litmus test for this trip will be. I mean, surely one of the ideal scenarios would be a de-escalation of the 232 tariffs, some kind of pause or rollback, or at least a period in which they could further debate them. Just this past week on September 30th, they slapped another 10% on softwood lumber. I mean, that will have an impact on direct workers, on mills across Canada. And the only thing we can hope for is that actually corporate U.S., the corporate United States, starts to speak about this, because who buys most of our wood from BC and other provinces? It's Home Depot, that's based in Georgia. So hopefully they'll push back and they'll say how this is hurting their bottom line, and that could actually urge, Trump. I'm with Corey that I don't have a lot of faith that will actually happen, but that is one of the venues in terms of applying pressure for Trump to actually take a pause and a beat on these 232 tariffs that are damaging, our economy so greatly and hurting workers particularly.
Is there a way that, publicly facing, Corey, in your mind, they could set some sort of expectations ahead of this trip? Like, should if they were asking your advice, would it be to set some?
I would set the expectation that nothing's going to happen. Like, this is going to be a conversation that, because I just don't see how there's an agreement coming out of this that's better than what the status quo is. The end game here is a renegotiation of CUSMA. Right now, as bad as the 232 tariffs are for those affected sectors, it could be a heck of a lot worse. And for most countries in the world, it is a heck of a lot worse. And I don't think we should be, speeding towards a deal that's worse than the status quo, which is, I think, almost inevitable if you're looking at comparables with other countries. So I would be lowering expectations, like with respect to the Home Depots of the world, to Kathleen's point. Last time around, we had companies in the United States who were willing to stand up and push back against administration when it was in their interest to do so. We have seen absolutely no sign of that happening this go around. Yeah. The friends and allies in Congress, in the Senate, governors, across the board, they've been cowed into silence. And I really think we're on our own. It's a much more difficult situation than it was last time. And, not to be too pessimistic, but I think it only gets worse from here.
So then to your first question, Scott, like, what is the point? And we talk about strategy, we talk about politics. Like, what is the point politically of going there on their turf to engage in that kind of conversation that could result in, as little as both Kathleen and Corey just described?
My guess, and to a certain degree, my point is, why should we be guessing? Why? Like, I don't think this conversation is particularly helpful to the government. If I was in the government, I wouldn't be thrilled with it, because we're speculating wildly, even as we seem to think that it's unlikely we'll see some kind of announcement. We're still speculating about that possibility. So why do I think they're going? My guess is the reality of the meeting is that it's come about because Trump has said, look, you know what? We've been talking by text. We've been sending telegrams and, balloonograms to one another. Let's actually just meet face to face. Come on down and let's talk about some stuff. So just like we're making this too complicated when we say, oh, well, what is the litmus test that can be set? What are the standards that might be set that we can just tell us what the meeting is? Like, if the meeting is just, we received an invitation, we want to talk this stuff through, we don't expect any announceables, we don't think any breakthroughs are going to occur. This is a necessary and important conversation, keep things on track, particularly with CUSMA looming, then just say that. That sets, as Corey suggested, expectations sell or low. And that's probably the right place to be. Because, leaving people to speculate as we are, that maybe there is a deal, or maybe there's a deal, but it's not good enough. That's a zero help to government. That's not where I would be, and that's not what I would tolerate in public. I'd get into the vacuum and fill it fast.
Even if a trade deal is struck, Mark Carney, his Liberal cabinet, and the Liberal ideology are all still actively blocking Canada's economy from growing. Look at all the companies leaving this country. Look at all the taxes that are being added to your day-to-day life. Even one of Canada's most powerful CEOs had this to say. Let's take a look.
Canadians, practical as ever, are asking straightforward questions. Will we have the courage to take advantage of this moment? Will we once again build and prosper? Or will we miss the opportunity again? Today I stand before you again, and I'll put it plainly. We can't walk anymore. We need to run and fast. The last 10 years have been a competitiveness disaster for Canada. But the next 10 can be a renaissance. If we choose to lead, this is our second chance. One doesn't often get second chances, and it's a better opportunity than it was before, but it comes with much higher stakes and less time to take action. I believe we can build. I believe we can compete. I believe we can win. But winning requires decisions, urgent, confident, investable decisions. Decisions that will lead Canada to becoming the best place in the world to build energy, infrastructure, and critical resource projects that fuel jobs and growth right across our entire economy.
But ultimately, what do you think? Do you think Carney is going to be able to secure some type of trade deal either soon or sometime down the road? Do you even think a trade deal will help save Canada? What do you think, in your opinion, if you were a prime minister, what would you do to help save the Canadian economy? And as always, like, subscribe, because I'll see you on the next one.